Now that the NFL regular season has come to an end, the first 18 picks of the 2025 NFL Draft have been set. Today we are going to be going through our very first mock draft with that exact order, what this draft is going to look like. So the Tennessee Titans ended up with the first overall pick. The Patriots dropped down after winning. So that leaves the Titans with the number 1 selection, and it's going to be very interesting to see, if they go with the best prospect available, if they go with the best quarterback, because Brian Callahan, assuming that he continues to be the head coach there, we'll know more over the next coming days, but assuming Brian Callahan is the coach of this team next season, I think he is going to want to move on from Will Levis. It just hasn't looked pretty at all for Levis, and I think he's going to want to bring in his own quarterback. So we are going to look at the top 2 quarterbacks in this draft, Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders. It's definitely interesting to see. Neither one of these guys to me are worth a top 5 selection, but I think both of them will go in the top 3 picks. So with the Titans at number 1, I think they're going to prefer Shedeur Sanders. He's very accurate. He plays on time. He's, somebody that makes good decisions, takes care of the football relatively well. Some of the things that make Joe Burrow a good quarterback, like Callahan had when he was the offensive coordinator in Cincinnati, I think he'll see some of that in Shedeur Sanders' game. For me personally, I don't think he does a very good job managing the pocket, avoiding sacks. Yes, his offensive line wasn't great, but he definitely had a lot of that being self-inflicted as well. Don't think his arm talent's fantastic, but I think there's a very good chance that the Titans end up selecting him to be their franchise quarterback at number 1 overall here. Number 2 overall for the Cleveland Browns. This is another very interesting opportunity for the Browns because Deshaun Watson is under contract. They reworked his deal. He's going to be on this team next year. He has to be from a financial standpoint. But I don't necessarily think that's going to deter them from selecting a quarterback because Watson has genuinely been one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the NFL since he came to Cleveland. And this year, before he got injured, he looked terrible. So I don't think that's necessarily going to stop the Browns from taking their guy. And I'm going to go with Cam Ward here. He's a gunslinger. He's ultra, competitive and confident in himself. He has a big arm. He's somebody with a lot of physical traits, but his decision-making is pretty, erratic. He definitely puts the ball in harm's way too often. He tries to improvise and make plays out of structure, which is good to an extent, but he definitely puts himself in trouble way too often when he does that. So those first 2 picks I definitely think could be quarterbacks. Be interesting to see, though, in a very weak quarterback class, if those 2 end up being the top 2 selections in this draft. The Giants at number 3, they obviously miss out on a quarterback, and I don't know what that means for their future. Sam Darnold is going to be kind of the big-time question mark if the Vikings do let him leave. I think he's definitely going to be interested in going to one of these teams like the Giants or the Titans, somewhere he can start right away and, potentially have some good playmakers around him. But I don't think the Vikings let him out the door. I think he's had too good of a season. So in this situation, the Giants maybe sign Justin Fields or somebody in free agency, but they definitely don't have their long-term option at quarterback. But you also can't take Jalen Milroe or, one of these other guys super early just for the sake of it, because that is disastrous when you reach for a quarterback like that. So I'm going to go with Travis Hunter, who is a great wide receiver, great corner. You can kind of put him on either side of the ball that you need him most. I think for the Giants, corner is a big need, but him and Malik Neighbors would be an awesome wide receiver 1-2 punch. I definitely think you could kind of play around with packages and what you can do with Travis Hunter, but for the Giants, you miss out on a quarterback, but maybe do get the most talented player in this draft. Number 4 for the Patriots. Ultimately, to me, the best player available is probably Abdul Carter, the edge rusher out of Penn State. I don't know if the Patriots go that way, though. They just fired Gerard Mayo, so, maybe they bring in a new head coach that wants to add to the defense, somebody like Mike Vrabel, who's kind of that hard-nosed defensive type of guy, but they need to help out Drake May, and you need wide receivers and offensive line. The supporting cast around Drake May is pretty terrible. I think taking an offensive lineman is a little bit rich here because I'm not sure any of the top guys are for sure going to be tackles. Campbell, Kelvin Banks, both of those guys, to me, could be guards, and you can't take a guard number 4 overall. So I'm going to go Tetairoa McMillan out of Arizona. He's very long, athletic, good at the catch point, somebody that has some run after catch ability. He's just a very unique build and a very, unique wide receiver that I do think could be a 1A for this Patriots team that desperately needs some playmaking options for Drake May. At number 5 for the Jacksonville Jaguars, I'm going to go with a corner here in Will Johnson out of Michigan. Has missed some time due to injuries, but his tape, especially last year, was fantastic. He has good size, athleticism, really sticky in coverage. He's good, instinctual, has good ball skills. I think Tyson Campbell is a very legitimate NFL corner. I think he's a very good player, but they've had a kind of rotating door on the other side, and I think you have invested a lot into that defensive line. Josh Hines-Allen, Trayvon Walker. If you can get a more reliable back end of the defense that allows those guys to really get after the quarterback, I think that could be a really good recipe for success on this defense. So I'm going to go Will Johnson at number 5. Then the Raiders at number 6. Definitely went back and forth on this a lot. You have Max Crosby. You signed Christian Wilkins to a big deal last year. You drafted Tyree Wilson really early. So, I thought about Abdul Carter, Mason Graham, both of those guys on the defensive line. But you've invested a ton of resources into defense, and especially that defensive front. Obviously, quarterback is what this team needs, but I don't think there's one available that you take in the top 6 picks here. And I don't know how Raiders fans are going to feel about this, but I'm going to go Ashton Jeanty out of Boise State. I think they will want to run the football a lot. When you don't have your quarterback of the future, go get a running back that can be a creator. And there's not many running backs in the league that can just truly carry an offense and be a true workhorse back. I think Jeanty can be that, and he is one of the best players in this draft, regardless of position. So I'm going to go with Jeanty at number 6. Raiders fans, definitely let me know your thoughts on that one. Number 7, to the Jets, I'm going to go with Mason Graham out of Michigan. He's a really good defensive tackle, somebody that can be really effective in the running game, 2-gapping, but I think he's most effective as a 3-tech where he can really use his athleticism, his pass rushing prowess. He's the kind of guy that you can pair with Quinnen Williams and they'd be, the best interior duo in the entire NFL. For a team that, definitely needs a culture reset and some guys that, have proven that they can win. Mason Graham's a national champion. He's done very well, in some big matchups. So I believe that Mason Graham could be a really good player for them at number 7. And he's the best player available to me besides maybe Abdul Carter and a position of need. So it makes sense to me there. Then at number 8, I'm going to go with Abdul Carter out of Penn State. I wouldn't be at all surprised if he ends up being, a top 5 pick, top 4 pick, because I really do think he is going to be one of the best players in this draft and one of the highest graded on my personal board as well. He's a freaky athlete. Was a former off-ball linebacker, converted to edge, started out a little bit slow, but his athleticism, speed, just ability to bend the corner and get after the quarterback with freaky traits, I think will make him a very high draft pick in this class. For the Panthers, if you can get him at number 8, that's the dream. I think they could even consider trading up for him, though they don't have their second-round pick. It's owned by the Chicago Bears. I think Carter is a fantastic prospect, somebody that will definitely be, in contention for a top 5, top 8 pick. So the Panthers definitely happy to get him here. At number 9 now for the New Orleans Saints, this team definitely kind of needs to reset a lot of things. You fired Dennis Allen. We'll be very curious to see what this team looks like with a new head coach and who that coach is, because I think it will be a multi-year rebuild with how much this team has kind of dug themselves into a hole with cap space and, just their investments over the past few years. It's not been a long-term outlook. It's trying to compete, and they haven't been able to. So I think they will definitely kind of hit a reset button here. I'm going to go with an edge rusher, though. They need to add to the defensive line, and Mykel Williams is the kind of player that they tend to really like. He's very long. He's athletic. He maybe doesn't have the pass rush profile yet that you would want to see out of a guy that you're taking in the top 10. But at 6'5", 265 pounds, he's got long arms. He's freaky athletic. He's definitely the kind of guy that, when you look at his physical traits, he's a top 10 pick. Now, he needs to put it together a lot more, but the Saints tend to like their edge rushers as these big, physical, mean types. I definitely think that Mykel Williams is kind of the prototype for that kind of player, and if he can put his traits together, he can turn into a really, really great edge rusher for the Saints. We'll be curious to see, though, if he can, reach that ceiling. For the Bears at number 10, pretty much the mission has to be protect Caleb Williams, one of the most sacked quarterbacks of all time in a single season. The only people that have been sacked more is David Carr twice and Randall Cunningham. So that's not, ideal by any stretch of the imagination. And not all of it's on the offensive line. Caleb takes a lot of sacks, but we've got to protect him better. And we're going to go with Will Campbell. Whether that means Campbell starts at left tackle and Braxton Jones is either, not on the team next year or playing, as kind of more of a swing tackle, or if Will Campbell swings into guard, if you decide to re-sign Braxton Jones, whatever it is, Campbell is a really good offensive lineman prospect. You need to protect Caleb better. It's a pretty simple selection here for the Chicago Bears. Then at number 11 for the San Francisco 49ers, very similar thinking, Kelvin Banks, the tackle out of Texas. He's another guy that could potentially be a guard due to shorter arms and his ability. But I think that for this 49ers team, you could use help at either position. Trent Williams definitely not getting any younger. I definitely think this offensive line took a massive step back, and that was a huge reason why this 49ers team really struggled this year. So I think they're going to want to get meaner in the trenches, somebody that can protect Purdy and really help this offense run the design that Shanahan is coming up with. So I'm going to go with Banks at number 11 there. Then at 12 for the Cowboys, obviously Genti off the board here, so they're going to have to go in a different direction. Defensive tackle definitely has to be a consideration. Their run defense and ability to get after the passer, especially on the interior, has been really, really bad this year. But I'm going to go with an offensive playmaker because this offense has just lacked explosiveness. Obviously, when Dak Prescott went down, that certainly didn't help. But CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott, they need another person to kind of work with them. I'm going to go with Luther Burden out of Missouri. Definitely didn't have quite as good of a year as you would want, but his quarterback play definitely fell off a cliff from the season before where he was incredibly productive. I think he's a yak monster, somebody that would fit in really nicely as kind of a power slot type of player and a guy that they could rely on as a number 2 option within this Cowboys offense. Number 13 for the Miami Dolphins, Javon Holland is somebody that is an upcoming free agent. We'll see what they ultimately decide to do with that. But with that in mind, I'm going to go with Malachi Starks out of Georgia. He's a rangy type of player. He's had a little bit more of an up and down season than he did his previous season at Georgia, but I still think he has some great flashes. He's a guy that can be a true free safety, can be one guy on the back end that can cover a lot of space and man up tight ends and slot wide receivers. He can do that on a relatively consistent basis. So if they do need to replace Javon Holland, I think Malachi Starks makes a ton of sense for this team at 13. Next, the Colts at number 14. We'll see what happens with Shane Steichen, whether he stays around. I think that they need to get a guy over the middle that can help out Anthony Richardson, be a big blocker in the running game, somebody that can make contested catches, be a tough player that you can use in creative ways, and that's exactly what Tyler Warren is. He's been just great for this team in 2024, 98 receptions, 1,158 yards, 8 touchdowns. He's just been moved all around the field. I think he's been huge for Penn State. He's a really good blocker at 6'6", 261 pounds. So if they want to rely on Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor in the running game, Warren can be an asset in that regard as well. They really haven't had much at the tight end position for a while, and I think it's time to upgrade that spot, and Warren could definitely provide some really nice upside at number 14 for the Colts. At number 15 for the Atlanta Falcons, Michael Penix definitely has shown some promise ever since taking over for Kirk Cousins. You could definitely continue to add to the offense, maybe the offensive line, but I think you have a lot of really good pieces there with Bijan Robinson and Drake London. Kyle Pitts is there, but you've got some good players. Darnell Mooney has played really well this year. So I think they need to add to the defense. Jalen Walker's a really interesting one. I definitely think they could go that route, but we are going to go with James Pierce Jr. out of Tennessee. He was really, really good in 2023 and definitely had another nice season in 2024. He's another guy that's kind of that true pass rusher. He's not a bad run defender, but where he really thrives is getting after the quarterback, bending around the edge with speed and finesse moves. He's really good in that regard. So somebody that can rush the passer at 6'5", 243 pounds. The Falcons have been looking for a really good pass rusher for a long time, and maybe they finally get it here with James Pierce Jr. at number 15. We have the Arizona Cardinals up next at number 16. I think they can continue to add to this defense, especially the pass rush, being more athletic in the front seven, and that's exactly what Jalen Walker can be for this team. Walker is another guy who's kind of a hybrid off-ball linebacker and edge player. I think he's done his best as an edge rusher or as a blitzing linebacker. Georgia definitely moved him around a ton, but I think that Jonathan Gannon could continue to be really creative with this type of player. I think he's just scratching the surface of what he can be as an edge rusher and a true designated pass rusher. So I think you can use his athleticism in off-ball situations, but he could be a really interesting pick for this team. I think that Gannon could definitely get the most out of him at number 16 here. For the Bengals at number 17, a team that finished off the year incredibly strong. It's pretty much what they do every year. They just need to start stronger. And as a Bengals fan, it's infuriating. But even though the defense has looked a lot better over the past few games, they need to add to the defense. And in particular, the interior defensive line, they just need to get better because they were not good against the run. There were some moments from Chris Jenkins and McKinley Jackson, but relying on that type of player to consistently provide pass rush is not what you want to do. I think they will continue to look to this position in free agency, but I'm going to go with Kenneth Grant out of Michigan. him. They didn't stop the run well at all this year as well. He's an 86.3 run defense grade, 8.7 pass rush win rate, which is really good for an interior player. He's just incredibly athletic and productive at 6'3", almost 340 pounds. He's just a really athletic, big body, and I think they could find creative ways to really use him on this defensive front. So I'm going to go with Kenneth Grant out of Michigan for the Bengals at number 17. Then at 18 for the Seattle Seahawks, they need to continue to add to this offensive line. It just hasn't been good enough, whether it's the guard spots, the tackles once they get injured. So that's the reason I'm going to go with Josh Simmons out of Ohio State, who did get injured this year and ended up having, surgery on his knee. But I think before that, he was going to, fly up draft boards. I really think that he could have been a top 10 pick if he had stayed healthy all year and, been a part of this Ohio State potential national championship run. Simmons looked really good in space. He had great hands, great technique, was a transfer from San Diego State, and he's somebody that I think could provide a lot of stability to this offensive line, whether he's starting out at guard and kicking out to tackle when Abraham Lucas or Charles Cross get injured, which seems to happen constantly, or whatever the plan is. I think Simmons can be a very valuable person to add to this offensive line, and you kind of figure out your best 5 guys from there. The Texans at number 19, you could add to the interior of this offensive line as well. Many offensive lines around the league, but I'm going to go to the defensive interior instead and pick Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss. He's a guy that, was transferred from Texas A&M. He's definitely really kind of shown a lot of growth this year. At 6'3", 305 pounds, he's a true kind of defensive tackle, but he's a really good pass rusher as well. 91.9 run defense grade, but a 10.3 pass rush win rate. He's just an incredibly productive type of player, had 6 sacks on the interior, 7 the year before. He's a guy that can generate some pass rush. He's played in the SEC at 2 different schools. I definitely think he's a player that could, really shoot up draft boards, be a top 20 pick, and definitely a very, very interesting piece for this Texans team to add to their defensive front. Then more pass rushers. We've had a couple, fly off the board, but I think that's really where the strength of this draft is. The interior defensive line, the edge rushers of this class. That's really where the strength of this class is. So we're going to have another one go off the board here to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's Nick Scorton out of Texas A&M. Hasn't had as maybe productive a year as he would have wanted, just 4 sacks, but he is a very polished player. He's maybe not the most dynamic pass rusher with his ability to fly around the edge and make plays in that regard, but he's just very technically sound. He's got a good power profile. He can, he's very polished in his approach. At 6'4", 285 pounds, he's just got, very solid size, length, and the ability to win with technical ability, which I think is a really, really good thing for this Buccaneers team that needs to continue to get after the quarterback a little bit more consistently. At 21 for the Denver Broncos, I've drafted Colson Loveland to them before. I think they could look at the tight end room for sure, tackle. They've got other areas they can attack, but I'm going to go with Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State. He's just had a really nice, productive season and kind of a bounce-back year. Just 514 yards last year with Kyle McCord at quarterback. Will Howard and this offense have featured him a little bit more, even with Jeremiah Smith there, and he's had 896 yards, 10 touchdowns. He's just such a reliable player, and I think he has such a high floor. He might not be a dominant number 1 wide receiver, but I think Courtland Sutton's a good wide receiver 1. He's maybe not special, but he's a good player. You add Emeka Egbuka in the slot, who's a guy that can just be really effective at route running, reliable hands, making tough catchers over the middle of the field. I think that's the kind of player that Bo Nix could really develop a good relationship with, and I think he could be a nice player for this Broncos team. And number 22 for the Pittsburgh Steelers, wide receiver, always, in consideration here, but Steelers tend to not draft first-round wide receivers, but George Pickens played horribly against the Bengals. I don't think he's necessarily a number 1 wide receiver, so I think that has to be in consideration. But we are going to go a different route here and select an offensive tackle because I think Ariante Ursary is really good value at this spot. Broderick Jones has definitely not looked like a first-round caliber type of player. Their other draft pick last year, another offensive tackle, went down with injury, so maybe tackle's not the biggest need on this team, but I don't think Broderick Jones has looked great. So continuing to add to this offensive line, even though they've invested heavily in it for the last couple of years, you're not getting a new quarterback. I think you could add weapons, but we're going to go with Ariante Ursary, who I think could be a better left tackle than they've had this year. So we're going to go with him at number 22. Number 23 for the LA Rams, another team that desperately needs offensive line help. Noteboom and some of the other guys, they've had a tackle spot, just hasn't been very good. We're going to go with Wyatt Millum out of West Virginia. He's somebody that's just been rock solid, hasn't allowed a single sack, hit, a couple of hurries here, but he has just been rock solid in his technique, in his approach against Big 12 opponents. His pass blocking grade's fantastic. His run blocking is really good as well. He is a little bit, he has less length, but at 6'6", 317 pounds, I think he can survive at tackle. Maybe he would be a better guard. Regardless, I think this team can continue to add to the offensive line and really help prolong Matthew Stafford's career as long as possible. And I do think they could continue to, add a late round quarterback to maybe ease that transition once it is time, but not a first round pick, in my opinion. Number 24 for the Green Bay Packers. Jair Alexander has been beat up over the past couple of seasons, has struggled to stay healthy. Other corners in that room have just not been consistent. So we're going to go with Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame, who did have season-ending surgery this year, pretty early on in the season. But he has really good length, athleticism. He's somebody that does, I think, fit most of their thresholds at 6 foot, 190 pounds. He's not the biggest, longest physical type of guy, but I think he's going to have good athletic traits. He's going to run well if he, is able to participate in the combine. And I think he's just a really rock-solid corner prospect and somebody that would have been drafted higher had he not gotten injured. So good value for the Packers at number 24, assuming that he is able to be healthy. Number 25 for the LA Chargers. This is an easy pick, but I think it makes sense. We're going to take Colston Loveland out of Michigan, reuniting him with Harbaugh there for the Chargers. They need to add to the tight end room. I think that this offense with Greg Roman is an offense that likes to use tight ends. You look at Mark Andrews and the success that Greg Roman had with him in Baltimore. If you can get another athletic guy that can just be a positional mismatch nightmare for defenses, I think Loveland would be a great fit in this Chargers offense. And maybe he's not quite the run blocker that they would want, but I think he's a really athletic, really, just dynamic tight end prospect that could cause a lot of matchup issues for this Chargers offense. Number 26 for the Commanders. I've mocked wide receivers to them quite a bit because I think they can definitely add another weapon to help Jaden Daniels. The offensive line, definitely another area where they could stand to improve. I think they could want to get better on the defense as well. Dan Quinn is the head coach of this team. He loves being able to just have a great defense at his disposal. And I think Shamar Stewart is a really interesting player because he is another guy that for Texas A&M maybe hasn't been as ridiculously productive as you would hope for in a first-round pick, just 2 sacks this year. But you look at, first of all, his run defense is really, really good. He's great at stopping the run, setting the edge, penetrating into the backfield. But he's also gigantic. At 6'6", 290 pounds, you would think maybe is this guy, a tweener? Is he an interior player at some times? I think he can be that in like NASCAR pass rush type of packages, but he is a true edge rusher. When you look at him, he looks gigantic, but he looks really well built, and he carries that weight very, very well. So he's just kind of another guy that it feels like is scratching the surface of what he can be. With a really good defensive coach like Dan Quinn, I think they could get the most out of him, and he could turn into a player that well outplays this number 26 selection. For the Ravens at number 27, they can continue to add to this offensive line. I think the right guard spot has been a little bit of a question mark. Roger Rosengarten hasn't been, fantastic for this team. I was a little bit lower on him. So I'm going to go with Cam Williams out of Texas. He's somebody at right tackle for Texas this year, has had some up and downs, but his traits are really, really nice. And you look at his 6'5", 335-pound frame. He's a guy that's definitely an offensive tackle. He has the length for it. He's got really all the traits that you look for. He just hasn't quite put everything together. And I think that's kind of a theme of this draft class is you're either drafting guys with maybe a little bit lower floor, but really high ceilings and really good potential, or maybe a guy that you don't think is ever going to turn into a superstar for you, but he's going to be a really nice role player based on what he's shown. I think the draft has a lot of those types of guys and not quite as many blue chip type talents that you would want in an NFL draft class. So you kind of got to take some swings where you want. And I think Cam Williams is a good swing for this Ravens team. Number 28 for the Eagles, they always go to the trenches, really. That's where they look in the first round of the draft. Offensive line, defensive line. I think they would have been interested in Cam Williams. I'm going to go to the other side of the ball, though, and look at Landon Jackson out of Arkansas. He's a guy that is great against the run. He's got fantastic size. He's 6'7". He's got really nice weight as well, 280 pounds. He's well built. And, he's got a nice power rush profile to him as well. Has been productive, 7 sacks the last 2 seasons each. So he's a guy, maybe he's not like a truly ridiculously dynamic pass rusher, but he's great against the run. He's got a great power rush profile. Somebody that I think could be a really nice edge too in this league and help replace Brandon Graham and some of the other guys that are getting a bit older on this team. I think they could definitely like Landon Jackson at number 28 here. Number 29 for the Buffalo Bills, I think they could add to the interior of their defensive line. And a player that I am really, really high on is Tyreek Williams out of Ohio State. He's just such a, tough guy to move off the ball. He's a nose tackle, and when you just look at his run defense grade, it pretty much shows it all. His run stopping is fantastic. He can two-gap at 6'3", 327 pounds. He's just so hard to move off the ball. He moves pretty well for his size as well, and he's not a completely inept pass rusher as well. Has 3 sacks this year, a 7.3 pass rusher win rate. So even as a nose tackle, I think he can provide some pressure on the interior. And for this Bills team, I think he would allow them to get tougher against the run and, have a true nose tackle next to Ed Oliver, which I think is huge for this team. At number 30 for the Vikings, we'll see, if Brian Flores is still the defensive coordinator of this team or if he gets a head coaching job. But if he is, he likes corners that can, really play one-on-one, be big, physical. Siobhan Revell, definitely that type of player, but Jahdae Barron is another guy who I think has played incredibly well this year. He's 5'11", 200 pounds, maybe doesn't fit their stereotypical mold, so you can take Siobhan Revell, a guy who was injured out of East Carolina, but has a great profile. But Jahdae Barron played safety. He played kind of all over the place over the past couple of years for Texas. You can see, he's played in the slot, played out wide at corner a lot more this year, in the box. He's been everywhere, and I think that allows him to be so good in zone coverage, reading the quarterback's eyes, knowing the right place to be at the right time. I think Jahdae Barron is going to be a first-round player, so we're going to take him at number 30 to the Vikings here at a position of need. For the Lions at number 31, you could definitely take an edge rusher to pair with Aiden Hutchinson. I think that you could also add to the interior of this offensive line. And once again, kind of like the Eagles, they're a team that is built through the trenches. And so we're going to go with Tyler Booker for that. Booker is a guy who I think, has played really well this year for Alabama. He's kind of cleaned some things up. And I think that, Zeitler and, the other guys on this team, Glasgow, they're good, but they're also not young by any means as well, and you are going to eventually deal with injuries on the offensive line. So Booker is a guy that maybe doesn't start year one, assuming they bring Zeitler back, but I think he could be a really nice player for them and a nice kind of succession plan down the road as well. And then at number 32 for the Chiefs, this is a guy who I think is way too low on PFF's board for where he's going to go. Josh Connerly out of Oregon. He's had a really nice year. Maybe started off a little bit slow, but has really started to turn things on and play really well. He's the left tackle for Oregon, and he has some nice traits, some nice size. It's 6'4", 315 pounds. He's somebody that I do think could be a franchise-level tackle. And, for this Chiefs team, Jawan Taylor's been very up and down. The other side, Kingsley Suamataia, some of the other guys different out there have not looked great. I think that's been a weakness of this team, so we're going to go with Josh Connerly to finish off the first round of this 2025 NFL mock draft. So now that the NFL season is over, the first 18 picks of this NFL draft are set. Who do you think your favorite team is going to take? Who do you want them to take? What do you think of this mock draft? Please let me know in the comments down below. If you like this kind of content, please hit that like button. While you're down there, hit that subscribe button as well. We'll be coming out with tons more mock drafts, player rankings, top 10 videos, all NFL draft stuff coming up over the next couple of months. So you won't want to miss it. Please hit those buttons. Supports the channel, and I truly do appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. I will catch you in the next one.